Hey guys, welcome back. On today's episode, we're going to take a more in-depth look at actions and also learn how we can pass data from our component to our front end. So let's get started. On the previous episode, we built a very simple button and I showed you guys how you can basically create how to submit basic AJAX requests to your server, right? And it was done by using wire click, right? Very simple to do. And in order to actually process that click event, we had to create a method of the same name on our component. Very basic stuff. And we will come back to that in just a minute. So first, learn how we can actually pass some data to our blade file, right? Now this is quite easy to do. There are two ways of doing it. The simplest way is we can actually go to our render method, as you can see here, and we can define as many variables as we like here. Very similar to how you would do it in your Laravel controllers. For example, I can say title, right? And I can define a simple string. And in order to pass it to my blade file, I can pass it to this view function as its second argument. So I can create an array here and then, for example, say title and pass it this way. This is the first way of passing it in. Or I can also call in compact and put title here. Okay, I don't like compact myself. I think it's quite confusing sometimes. So I'll prefer this way. We can basically create an array and then pass in as many variables, as many data as we want to our blade files. I also create another one. I say users. And in here, we can also access the database. Okay, anything you can do in your controllers, you can also do in your blade components. So here, for example, I'll load in the user model and I have already set up my database connection. So I'm connected to the database. And for example, here I can say, get all the users on my database, which right now I don't have any, but I can pass that in. I can say users and then users, right? So this gives us an easy way to pass data down to our blade file, right? This livewire.click. And to display these data, it's very simple. We can just basically access them the same way you would on any blade file, right? So if I want to show the title variable, I can just say use the echo syntax in blade and say title. And our users is going to be basically, it's going to be a collection, right? So I won't be able to just echo it. But what I can do is, for now, I just say count users because we don't have any users at the moment, okay? So let's see what we get right now. If I reload the page, you can see we have a test, which is the title variable we created, and then we get 0 because we don't have any users in our database, okay? So now that we have kind of learned how to pass data to our blade file, we can go ahead and actually update our handle click, right? So I'm going to delete this. And inside here, I'm going to rename this to create new user. Okay, I'm going to create a button that when I click on it, I want it to create a new user on our database. Okay, so let's go build something very simple today. And for this one, I'm going to say create new user. So I'll use the wire click we learned on the previous episode, and I'll pass this to our component. So in order to handle this click event, I need to create a method of the same name on our component. And basically, whenever you get an action event, you can also do whatever you can do on your controllers inside here. So I can use a database, I can use the session, I can do whatever I like. So what I can do, for example, when we get this, I can get our user model and call the create method on it. And then I think for bare minimum, we can pass in a name. I say name test user. I'll give it an email. I say test@test.com, something like that. And then I'll pass it in a random password for now, okay? This is just the dummy data. And that's it. So I can basically access the database if I wanted to. I could access the session, anything like that we can do here. And as we go on, we will learn more about it. Okay, so now we have basically created a button that will create a new user. So let's go test this out. I'll come over here, I'll reload the page, and I'm going to click on create new user. And you can see this number actually changed. So what happened is when I clicked on this button, we sent a request to our server in the background using an AJAX request, and it executed this create user, right? So right now I'll remove it, or maybe I change this to test user number 2, so we don't get an error, and we can actually go ahead and take a look at the network request. Okay, so I'll click, and the moment I click it, Livewire sends an AJAX request, and it's again from Livewire. We can see livewire.js, and if we actually take a look at what we sent, Livewire is basically, as you can see, it says call create new user, right? So Livewire is sending a request to our server telling it, hey man, I want to execute create new user. And as a response, if we take a look, we can actually see the HTML for our page, and you can see that's number 2, you see? So the number of users on our database changed, right? So whenever Livewire sends a request to our server and it performs some request on our component, it runs this render function again. So it re-renders our component and sends it back with the AJAX response. And we can see the HTML over here, right? It's in this JSON file. So that's our HTML. We can see test here. We can see this number 2. And then we can see our button again. And Livewire will go ahead and replace this HTML here with the HTML we have on our page, right? Now, it's a bit smarter. It won't fully replace it. But in the later episode, I will cover exactly how Livewire does it. But for our case, basically Livewire will just update and refresh the page intelligently and show us the updated results, right? So it's super simple like that. And yeah, this is the very basics of displaying content on our page. Now, there is a second way of doing this. So the first way I showed you guys was by defining it inside the render method or the render function. What we can do is we can also define any public property on our component. So I say public, and I say username, and I can set it to whatever I like. It could be a number, it could be anything. For example, I say test user. Whenever you define a public property, it will automatically be accessible inside your blade file. Okay, so in order to test this, we can go in our blade file, and I'll add an h2 here, and I say username, just like that. And if we go ahead and we reload, we can see our username here. So there are 2 ways of basically sending data from our component to our views. One way is we can define them in our render method. The second way is by defining a public property. There is a third way using computed properties. We will cover that later on. That's a bit more advanced, but that's the main 2 ways. And you should be able to basically build anything you want using these 2 ways. And that's very simple, guys. So we can create the very basic stuff using what we have here. It's still quite limited. We need to learn how to actually do data binding, but that's all for today. On the next episode, we cover data binding and also how to send data from our front end to our back end. Right now, we're only doing it one way, from our back end to our front end. On the next episode, we cover that. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like so more people can see the video, and subscribe for more content. And I see you guys on the next episode. Have a great day. Bye.